She had been a cat since 7 o'clock in the morning. That was what she told herself, perched on the cold brick of a garden wall on a Muggle street in Little Whinging, her paws tucked beneath her, and her tail wrapped neatly around them. She told herself, "This is necessary." She told herself that Albus Dumbledore was wrong, as she had told him to his face in the small hours of the night before, and as she had been telling him silently every hour since. She told herself she was watching and waiting, and that she was still here because someone had to be. She did not tell herself because leaving would mean admitting it was over. The street was quiet now, as Muggle streets became in the small hours of November. Number 4's curtains were dark. The inhabitants whom she had watched for 14 hours through amber cat eyes and found wanting in every way that mattered had long since gone to bed. Vernon Dursley had spent 3 hours this evening reading something about drills. She had made no telephone calls. The wizarding world was celebrating around her. All day, owls had swept overhead carrying letters. 2 shooting stars had arced over Bristol at noon, and she had overheard 3 muggles on the corner debating whether they had imagined seeing them. Minerva McGonagall sat on a garden wall and felt none of it. She was still thinking of Lily. She had known Lily Evans since the girl was 11 years old, had watched her arrive at Hogwarts, bright as something lit from within, the sort of student who made every other student in the room sharper simply by existing. She had taught her transfiguration for 7 years, watched her perfect and surpass, watched her fall in love with James Potter and outgrow every category Minerva had tried to put her in. She had last spoken with Lily on a Tuesday in August, and Lily had been in the middle of an argument about charms modification, and Minerva had been trying to get her out of the staff room and to dinner, and she had not said anything she would have wanted to say if she had known it was a Tuesday in August, and then this, 21 years old and already dead. Minerva closed her amber eyes and sat very still on the wall. She was still sitting this way when she heard the motorcycle. She knew the engine before she saw the headlight, knew it as the sound of Sirius Black's enchanted machine, which half the Order had heard at one time or another, and which produced in her now a grief so sharp it was almost anger. She stood up on the wall, absurd and precise, a tabby cat at attention, and then stepped out of herself, the cold, familiar wrench of the transformation, and she was standing on the pavement in her travelling cloak with the November dark pressing in on all sides. Albus Dumbledore materialized from the far end of the street a moment before the flying motorbike descended from the sky. Minerva. His voice had that particular careful quality, the voice he used when a decision had already been made, and he was being courteous enough to allow others to speak first. Albus. She looked at him steadily. I have been sitting on that wall all day. I'm perfectly aware of what you intend to do. I know. They are the worst sort of muggles imaginable. I know. He will be famous, she said, before he is old enough to understand what fame means. And these people, she gestured at number 4, at the dark curtains, at the sorry state of the front garden, will not be able to cope with it. You are proposing to leave James and Lily's child on this doorstep. It is not a proposal. He had the grace to look pained. It is the only arrangement that will keep him safe. She knew the argument. She knew it the way you know a locked door, by pressing against it repeatedly and finding it will not move. Lily's sacrifice. Lily's blood in her sister's body, in Petunia Dursley's blood, and as long as Harry lived inside the ring of that shared blood, the ancient protective magic would hold. Minerva believed something different. She had been carrying it in her pocket since 3 o'clock that afternoon. The motorbike touched down at the far end of the street, and Rubeus Hagrid climbed off it with the careful, effortful gentleness of a man afraid of his own size. He was carrying something bundled in blankets. His cheeks were wet beneath the wild black beard. Professor McGonagall. He crossed the street to her with the bundle pressed against his chest. "Professor Dumbledore, sir? He's all right. He's sleeping." Dumbledore stepped forward with his hands raised. Waiting, McGonagall stepped forward too. She drew out the folded parchment from her pocket. It was sealed with an impression she recognized, a pressure enchantment keyed to Lily's own magical signature, one she had seen Lily use to close ordered documents. It had opened for Minerva and for no one else. She had opened it, standing on this garden wall, at 3 o'clock this afternoon, in cat form, which had made the reading somewhat undignified but no less binding. "She gave this to me in August," Minerva said. "She told me she hoped I would never need to open it." She looked at Dumbledore directly. "She named me as Harry's magical guardian in the event that neither she nor James survived to make other arrangements. The will is valid, Albus. Gringotts will confirm it." Hagrid looked between them with the slow bewilderment of someone watching a chess match conducted in a language he doesn't speak. Dumbledore went very still. After a long moment, almost too quiet, "Minerva, may I?" she said to Hagrid, and held out her arms. Hagrid looked at Dumbledore. Dumbledore did not speak. Hagrid transferred the bundle. The weight of it she had not expected. Harry James Potter was asleep in her arms. Approximately 15 months old, his black hair wild and impossible even in sleep. She looked at his face and saw Lily's face and James's face together, in some proportion she could not have named, and there was a scar on his forehead in the shape of a lightning bolt that had not been there 3 days ago and would not leave. She felt it then, up through her feet and her shoes and into the arms that held him. Far to the north, impossibly far, and yet there was a recognition. Not a sound. Something older than sound, a warmth that moved upward through her, a settling, the click of something enormous, finding the position it had been waiting to occupy. She felt the castle. Not as a building, but as a presence, old and attentive and awake, and what it said, without any words that were words, was simply, "Yes." Hagrid went pale beneath his black beard. He had spent 42 years at Hogwarts, and he felt things in it that she suspected no one else did. Dumbledore's eyes were closed. "Albus," she said, and kept her voice level. "The blood protection, I know. Do you understand what he will not have? I understand what you would have given him instead." She held his gaze. "And I am telling you that this castle is not nothing. 10 centuries of layered enchantments. Anti-muggle wards that have never been breached. Anti-apparition. The castle's own awareness. You know it is aware, Albus. You have told me so yourself. It chooses what it opens and what it seals, and tonight it has made a choice that neither of us can undo." He stood there in the cold for a long time. The November dark sat on both of them like a judgment. "No," he said finally, "I don't suppose we can." He looked at the child in her arms, not with regret, which was an expression she knew well on his face, but with something she had never seen on him before, something that lived beneath regret. Fear given over at last to a fact he could not change. "I shall want to know how he is," he said. "You will ask," she said, "and I will answer." She did not thank him. There was nothing to thank him for, but somewhere in the tight space where she kept the things she could not say, she acknowledged that he was afraid for Harry too. She walked north, carefully, carrying Lily's son through a night cold enough to ache. Harry slept through all of it. At the end of the street, beneath a lamp, she stopped and looked at his face in the pale yellow light. The lightning bolt's scar, raw and new, the black hair pressed flat against his forehead in sleep. She could not see the color of his eyes in the dark, but she knew what color they were. She turned away from Privet Drive and did not look back. Somewhere to the south, Sirius Black was already moving through the November dark, hunting the man who had killed his friends. He would not find him. By the morning after tomorrow, he would be in Azkaban, and the godfather who should have been waiting for this boy would not be coming. Lily had thought of this. She had pressed a piece of parchment into Minerva's hands in August and said quietly, "I hope you never need it." She disapparated into the cold. Behind her the street was empty, and number 4 sat undisturbed, and the letter Dumbledore had meant to leave on the doorstep was still in his pocket. The castle was dark when she arrived, which was wrong. The castle was never dark. There were always torches in the entrance drive, always warmth in the stone. What was different now was that she noticed it, coming through the gates at 2 in the morning with an infant pressed against her chest, the cold at her back, and the great doors standing open before her. She had not asked anyone to open them. She walked in. The warmth that enclosed her in the entrance hall was not only the warmth of stone and fire. She recognized it. The same vibration she had felt at Privet Drive the moment Harry settled into her arms, the castle confirming itself around the child. She held him closer and kept walking. Her rooms were exactly as she had left them. Ordered, impersonal, the life of a woman who had not required any of the things she would now need. No cot, no milk. One narrow bed, correct for a professor, and entirely wrong for someone, 15 months old. She stood in the center of the room and looked at the child in her arms. He was awake. His eyes were lilies, green and serious, and paying very close attention, the look of someone who had not yet decided what conclusions to draw. "I don't know what I'm doing," she told him. He did not seem alarmed. He put a small fist against her jaw, which was either comfort or a structural evaluation. She laid him on the hearthrug with a warming charm around him and went to the wardrobe. The bottom drawer was empty. She pulled it free, set it on the floor, and stood over it and thought, length, sides, padding. The transfiguration took 7 minutes, and she remade it 4 times before the proportions were correct. She added lining from the quilt at the foot of her bed, and built a warming enchantment into the wood, and produced something that was not a cot, but was functional. She put Harry in it. He looked at the ceiling. Then he closed his eyes and went to sleep. She stood over the bassinet in the firelight and thought, I have no idea what I am doing, and also, this is manageable. She had begun enough difficult things to know that the first night was not the measure of any of them. She went to bed. She slept 4 hours. The castle kept the corridor quiet. Dumbledore came at 9 in the morning. He had not slept. She knew the look. He came in and looked at the bassinet the way she had been looking at it all morning, with the careful attention of someone measuring something they cannot alter. "The seal is permanent," he said. "I believe so. Gringotts will confirm the will this week. There will be questions from the ministry. I will handle what I can." He crossed the room and looked down at Harry, who was awake and examining his own fingers with total concentration. "He has her eyes," Dumbledore said. Yes, a silence. The fire settled. Dumbledore's face did something she could not quite name, not regret, which she knew the shape of, something older. "I intend to watch over both of you," he said. "I will not pretend I am not afraid for him, but the magic has acted, and I cannot undo what I cannot override. What I can do is ensure that neither of you faces what comes alone." She thought of everything she could say in return, that she had not asked for his reassurance, that the arrangement existed because he had been wrong. She said none of it. "I know," she said. She meant, "I understand what you are offering." She meant, "We are going to have to manage this together for a very long time." He left an hour later. They had reached an armed peace, and it was the best she could give him, and it was probably more than he deserved. Hagrid appeared on the third morning with a basket, a bottle of warming milk, 4 nappies, a wooden hippogriff toy, and a small blanket she recognized from the motorbike. He filled the doorframe in a way that was not quite physically possible, and stood there with his eyes red and his black beard damp, and she said, "Come in." He sat on her hearthrug. Nothing else in the room could support him, and she placed Harry on his knee, and for a moment they both looked at the child the way people look at things they are not certain they are allowed to have. Then Harry's hand closed around Hagrid's enormous index finger, and Hagrid made a sound she could not describe and would not try to. "He's all right," Hagrid said very quietly. "He doesn't know yet. No, not yet." Hagrid held Harry for the better part of an hour, telling him about the grounds in the particular careful way of someone who believes a very small child can understand if you just explain things properly. Harry watched his face with Lily's attentive eyes. This was how it began between them. Minerva watched it and thought, "Good." She was one person, a deputy headmistress with a staff and a castle, and obligations that had not paused. She needed help. She had not expected it to appear at her door, on the third morning, with a basket and a grief so large it had nowhere to go except into the child. She made Hagrid a cup of tea. They sat on opposite sides of the room in a silence that was not unfriendly, and Harry slept across Hagrid's knee. She was walking the second-floor corridor late in the second week. Harry, fussy, refusing to sleep, the motion the only thing that worked. Snape stopped. He had been heading somewhere. His face had the closed look of a man who had been alone with his thoughts for hours. She kept walking because she did not know what else to do, and when they were 4 meters apart, Harry turned his head. He looked at Snape with Lily's eyes. She had known it would happen eventually, and told herself she would not watch. She watched anyway because she was responsible for this child, and had to know. Snape's face did not crumple. He was not a man who crumpled. It went very still and very closed, the way a window shuts, not a slamming but a sealing. He looked at Harry for perhaps 3 seconds. Then he turned and walked back the way he had come. He was not at dinner that evening. She noted it. She said nothing, to him or anyone else. There was nothing to say that would not be an intrusion into something that was not yet finished becoming itself. The Daily Prophet reported on the 6th day that Harry Potter was alive and well, under the guardianship of Deputy Headmistress Minerva McGonagall of Hogwarts School. The ministry had not objected. The will was legal, and the ancient magic seal was not a thing you could argue with in Committee Sirius Black, had been arrested without trial 2 days after the divergence. She read that paragraph twice, then set the paper aside. She had known from the moment she heard the name, Harry's godfather was not coming. Whatever had happened on a Muggle street, whatever Sirius had done or failed to do, the result was Azkaban. Harry would grow up without him. That was a fact now, like the scar. She folded the paper and went back to the bassinet. Lupin came in late November. He appeared at the castle gates on a grey afternoon and was let up because the gate recognized he had a reason to be there, which was the castle's own judgment and which she had learned to trust. He looked 21 but grieved older. He stood in the corridor outside her rooms and did not say anything for a long time. She put Harry in his arms after 5 minutes and left them by the fire because some things are accomplished more quietly when the third person has found something else to do. When she came back, Lupin was still holding Harry, telling him something about a broomstick, a laugh, a Tuesday that had clearly meant something. Harry's fist was closed around Lupin's finger, the same way it closed around Hagrid's, and he was watching Lupin's face with Lily's eyes and James's complete attention. "He'll want to know," Lupin said. He meant his parents. "I know," she said. Lupin left in the early evening and said he would come back. She believed him. She stood in her rooms in the dark for a moment before lighting the lamps. Harry made a small questioning sound from the bassinet, and she went to him and picked him up, and he put his hand against her jaw. And she stood at the window with him and looked out at the grounds, the lake, the dark tree line of the forest. The castle was quiet around them. Whatever it had done, whatever confirmation it had offered, whatever choice it had made independent of wizard will, it was not undone. It held. Elphinstone Urquhart proposed to her during a summer stroll around the lake. This was not itself surprising. He had proposed before, twice, in the years before Dougal McGregor's death, and she had declined both times with the efficient regret of a woman who knew her own mind. What was different this time was Harry. Harry, who was 21 months old and sitting on her hip, watching the lake with the focused attention of someone who suspected it was up to something. Elphinstone had gone down on one knee on the grass path, which had been somewhat undignified given that the ground was still damp from the morning, and had said what he had to say, and Minerva had looked down at him and then at Harry. Harry at this point produced a sound that might have been a word or might have been an opinion on the reeds. She said, yes. She was 46 years old, had told herself she would not do this, and stood on the lakeside with a baby on her hip and tears running down her face that she had absolutely not intended to produce. Elphinstone had risen from the grass with mud on his knee and taken her hand and said nothing for a long time, which was one of the many things she had always valued in him. Harry patted her face with some urgency, evaluating the tears, appearing to conclude they were not a structural problem. She laughed, which surprised her. "You understand what you're getting," she said. "I understand exactly what I'm getting," Elphinstone said. This was 1982, and it turned out to be true. He purchased a small cottage in Hogsmeade. It was the sort of cottage that appeared to have been built by someone who loved right angles less than she did. Low-ceilinged, irregular, full of shelves that did not quite meet the walls, and a hearth that smelled of pine and drew beautifully in cold weather. Elphinstone filled it with his books, and his particular habit of leaving his reading glasses on every surface except the one he was currently occupying. Minerva commuted to Hogwarts from it each morning during term, apparating to the gates at the same time she always had. Harry grew up in both places simultaneously, which meant he grew up between two kinds of space: the cottage, which was small and warm and comprehensible, and the castle, which was vast and ancient and not. He learned to walk in the great hall. This was not deliberate. She had brought him to Hogwarts on a Sunday in late winter, when he was 14 months old, installed him on the floor near the staff table with a set of wooden blocks Hagrid had made, and turned away for 4 minutes to discuss something with a colleague. When she turned back, Harry was on his feet in the center of the great hall, with his arms held out to either side, taking the lurching, exploratory steps of someone who had only recently discovered that legs were load-bearing. The hall echoed around him. He did not fall. He made it 7 steps before sitting down, apparently satisfied, and returning his attention to the blocks. The castle, she thought, was a reasonable place to learn. It would not let him fall down the stairs. He was 3 when the book moved. Elphinstone had been reading to him, his 3rd story of the evening, the second one twice, and had said, with the particular cheerful firmness of a man who knew his own limits, that it was time for sleep. Harry had not agreed with this assessment. He had stared at the shelf, and the book had slid from its place and opened itself on the floor to the first page, and they had both looked at it. Minerva was in the doorway. She had been about to say the same thing Elphinstone had said. She said nothing instead. "Well," Elphinstone said after a moment. He closed the book carefully and set it back on the shelf. "That was very clever. But we are still going to sleep." Harry went to sleep. Elphinstone came out into the passage and gave Minerva a look, and she gave him a look back that meant, "Yes, I know, we'll discuss it in the morning, and also, it seems he has at least average aptitude." They did not discuss it in the morning so much as sit across from each other at the kitchen table and feel quietly, carefully proud, in a way that neither of them had entirely expected to feel. She had taken a Muggle-Studies colleague's view that she had never adopted children, was not a mother, did not have the instincts for it. What she had instead, she was discovering, was a conviction that this child would not be failed, and it turned out that conviction performed most of the functions instinct was supposed to. She kept her name. This had not been a negotiation. Elphinstone had not asked her to change it, had, when the subject arose at all, simply said that he had never expected she would, which was one of the things she had always valued about him alongside the patience and the reading glasses. She was McGonagall. She had been McGonagall for 46 years, and she was going to be McGonagall for however many years remained. The students called her Professor McGonagall. Elphinstone called her Minerva. Harry, who was working through his options at the time, called her approximately 4 different things in 1984 and settled on something that was not quite Min and not quite Minnie, and that she chose not to examine too closely. She was not a woman who required her identity confirmed by anyone. But she had known enough women whose identities had been quietly renegotiated, marriage by marriage, year by year, until the original person was difficult to locate. She intended to remain locatable. In 1985, Elphinstone died. He died in St. Mungo's Hospital for Magical Maladies and Injuries on a Tuesday in early spring, from a venomous tentacular bite he had sustained 3 days earlier in the greenhouses of a botanical garden. The healers had done what they could. It was not enough. She had been with him at the end, and then she had been in the corridor of St. Mungo's, and then she had been nowhere she could clearly account for, and then she had been in the Hogsmeade cottage. Harry was 5. He did not understand what had happened. He understood that Elphinstone was not there, that McGonagall had been gone for 2 days, that when she came back, she was a version of herself he had not seen before, very still, very quiet, sitting at the kitchen table with her hands around a cup of tea that went cold. He stood in the doorway for a while, the way she had stood in his doorway 3 years earlier. Then he came across the kitchen and climbed into her lap. She let him. She sat at the kitchen table in the Hogsmeade cottage, with Harry's small weight across her, and did not move for a very long time. The fire burned down. She cast a warming charm without thinking. The way you do when something is cold and warmth is what you have. Harry fell asleep with his head against her shoulder. She held him and looked at the window and thought about the particular shape of loving someone for 3 years and then finding the space where they were. She had known grief before. She had lost people in the war, in the years before. She knew the texture of it, knew that it did not resolve, only became navigable. This was the same and not the same. The same because loss was loss. Not the same because of the 5-year-old asleep in her arms who had no one else. She closed the cottage in April. She was thorough about it, went through every room, packed what needed to be packed, left what could be left, closed windows and doors, and let the enchantment settle. Elphinstone's reading glasses she wrapped in cloth and put in her coat pocket, which was not something she examined very closely. Harry carried 3 things from the cottage: a book Elphinstone had read to him 6 times, a flat grey stone from the lake path that had good weight to it, and a drawing he had made of Elphinstone in wax crayon, which was not an accurate likeness, but was recognizable by colour: the red of his jumper, the grey of his hair. He carried these in a canvas bag that had been Elphinstone's, and that was too large for a 5-year-old to carry correctly. Minerva carried nothing. She already lived at Hogwarts. She had always lived at Hogwarts. The cottage had been a 3-year interval, a warmth inserted into a life that had not lacked for meaning, but had sometimes in the small hours of long winters lacked for warmth. She had been given it. She had been given Elphinstone, and then this child, and then the end of Elphinstone, and now this, the child, the castle, the work. She walked through the gates with Harry's hand in hers, and did not look back. The castle was, as it always had been. The torches lit as they came up the drive, the great doors standing open, the warmth of the entrance hall coming out to meet them. Harry stopped in the doorway and looked up at the height of the ceiling, the staircases, the suits of armor. He had known his whole life. "Are we home?" he asked. "We are home," she said. By the time Harry was 7, the librarian had stopped following him between the shelves. This was resignation on the librarian's part, produced by McGonagall over the course of several conversations. The arrangement: Harry could read what he liked provided he stayed out of the restricted section and did not disturb the older students, who regarded him the way one regards familiar furniture, with the indifference of people for whom a thing has simply always been there. He had read everything available up to 4th and 5th year level in Transfiguration and Charms, a history of Hogwarts less informative than the castle itself, and a survey of potion theory he understood imperfectly but found structurally interesting. The portraits had told him things the history books hadn't. Most people did not sit still long enough to listen to portraits. He sat still very well for a child. He had always been good at listening. Fang was 3 years older than Harry, which in boarhound years meant he had already been enormous when Harry was an infant and was now the size of a small sofa and deeply committed to resting on it. Harry had learned to walk, partly by holding on to Fang's side. By age 5, he could name every creature Hagrid kept or knew about, which was a longer list than most people suspected. Hagrid's hut was warm, in a way that was different from McGonagall's rooms or the castle corridors. It smelled of earth and animal and the particular sweetness of Hagrid's rock cakes, which were inedible, but produced a pleasant smell in the oven. Harry spent Saturday mornings there, from the time he was old enough to be trusted not to touch things without asking, which Hagrid had determined was age 4. He was not always right about which creatures to approach, but Hagrid was never wrong about which ones would not hurt him if he did. He had held a bowtruckle at age 6 and fed a hippogriff at 8, bowing first and holding very still until it bowed back. By the time his classmates encountered magical creatures in 3rd year, Harry would find their surprise genuinely difficult to understand. Animals responded to how you approached them. He found this true of most things that were not people. He had always known the ghosts were there. They had simply been part of the castle, like the moving staircases and the portraits and the draughts that appeared in the 4th-floor corridor in cold weather. He was 8 before it occurred to him to ask about them specifically. "Sir Nicholas," he said. He had found the Gryffindor ghost near the trophy room on a Thursday afternoon, drifting in a way that suggested he had nowhere particular to be. "Why is your head not all the way off?" Sir Nicholas explained. Harry listened to the whole account, the execution, the blunt axe, the 45 times, the incomplete result, with the careful attention he gave to everything. "Have you always been here?" he asked when the ghost had finished. "Since 1492, Sir Nicholas said with a complicated pride. "Are my parents here?" Harry said. "As ghosts?" The ghost went still in the particular way of the long dead, who have learned that some silences are kinder than answers. Harry went to McGonagall that evening and asked her directly. She put down the parchment she had been marking. She looked at him in the way she had when he asked about the scar the first time, the preparatory look of someone deciding how much truth to give a child, and then revising the calculation upward. "No," she said. "They are not. Your parents chose to pass on. What does that mean?" "It means that becoming a ghost requires a choice, a fear of death, or a strong attachment to something unfinished. Your father was not afraid of much, and your mother," she paused. "Your mother was the bravest person I have ever known, and she had finished what she needed to finish. She made sure of that." Harry thought about this for several days. He decided it was the right answer, though he could not have said why, precisely. The rightness of it was something he held alongside the wax crayon drawing, still in his canvas bag, and the flat grey stone from the Hogsmeade Lake path. He had learned to keep the people he had lost in specific places, rather than looking for them in the wrong ones. By age 10, his relationship with Snape had a texture that neither of them had named. Snape did not teach him. They passed each other in corridors, in the entrance hall, in the covered bridge. Harry had grown up watching Snape move through the castle the way one watches any constant of the environment. The drafts in the 4th-floor corridor, the step on the main staircase that sank 2 inches on the left side. Snape was a feature. He was precise and unsociable, and his robes moved like he had strong opinions about the direction he was going. Twice, Harry had been reading a textbook he was not technically old enough to have yet, both times a third-year potions volume the librarian had issued on the strength of McGonagall's standing permission, and had come across a term he pronounced incorrectly. Both times, Snape had passed the table he was sitting at, not appeared to look, and said the word correctly in a voice that was not quite speaking to Harry, and was not quite not. Both times, Harry had not thanked him. He had corrected his own pronunciation on the next pass, and that was, apparently, the entire exchange. Harry understood this. He was 10, and had grown up in a castle. He understood that things could be offered sideways and received sideways, and neither party had to acknowledge the transaction. He did not thank Snape, and Snape did not acknowledge that he had done anything worth thanking. This seemed on both sides satisfactory. He had asked about the scar, at 9 possible. He had known there was a story, had always known the way you know about a thing that everyone around you is slightly careful about mentioning. The scar was on his forehead. He could see it in mirrors. He had asked what it was when he was 6, and McGonagall had said it was from an accident when he was a baby, and that she would explain fully when he was older, which had satisfied him then, and ceased to satisfy him by 8. At 9, he sat across from her at the kitchen table in her rooms, and said he wanted to know now. She told him. She used the name Voldemort, which she said without flinching, and he remembered the name afterward in the specific way he remembered things that had weight to them. She told him about Godric's Hollow, about his father who had died without his wand in his hand buying Lily time to run, about his mother who had refused to step aside and had been killed in his nursery, and who had, in dying, left a protection in his blood, so powerful it had turned the killing curse back on the man who cast it. "She loved you," McGonagall said, "completely and without condition. It became the most powerful magic in the world. There is no counter-curse for it. Is he gone? Harry said. Voldemort, he is diminished, not gone. She looked at him steadily. There is a prophecy that says you and he must meet again. I do not know its full text. I know it exists, and I know it means that this is not over. He was 9. He held this. He did not panic. He asked one more question. Did she know when she didn't move? Did she know it would protect me? I believe she knew exactly what she was doing, McGonagall said. She said it without crying. He was old enough by then to see what it cost her. He was 10 now. He knew the castle the way he knew his own hands. He knew which portraits would talk and which would pretend not to be home. He knew that the 3rd step from the top of the east staircase was a trick step, and had known it since age 6, when he had fallen into it up to the knee, and Hagrid had pulled him out. He knew the smell of every corridor by season, the draughts, the shortcuts, the rooms that locked themselves on the full moon, and the ones that unlocked in rain. He knew the staff, not as teachers yet, but as the people his childhood had been built around their schedules, their habits, the things they worried about when they thought no one was listening. What he did not know was what it felt like to sit at a table with someone who had been born in the same year he had. He did not know what a friend his own age was like. He knew Hagrid, who was enormous and loyal and 57 and did not count. He knew McGonagall, who was his guardian and his North Star and 50 years older than him, and did not count. He knew Lupin, who came 3 or 4 times a year and sat by the fire and told him things about his parents in a voice that was careful and sad. He knew the ghosts by name, and the portraits by face, and the suits of armor in the main corridor by the particular sounds they made in high wind. He did not know anyone who thought about Quidditch the way he privately had begun to think about Quidditch, because there was no one to tell. September was 4 months away. He had not begun to understand what September meant. The owl arrived at breakfast on his 11th birthday and deposited a letter on the table in front of him, with the self-important precision of a bird that knew it was delivering something significant. Harry looked at the envelope. Then he turned it over. Mr. H. Potter, Deputy Headmistress's Quarters, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. He read this twice. He thought about the owl that had flown through the corridors of the castle he had lived in for 11 years to deliver a letter to the person he ate breakfast with every morning. He turned the envelope over again and checked whether there was something on the other side that would explain this. There wasn't. I already know the supply list, he said, and handed it to McGonagall. She took it, opened it, read it, and set it down with the particular care of someone placing something exactly where she wanted it. That is not the point, she said. Then what is the point? The point, she said, is that you are a student now, not a resident, not a visitor, not the boy who lives in the deputy headmistress's quarters, a student. The letter makes it official. Gringotts will need the date. He was 11 and had just received a letter telling him that the school he had been living in since before he could walk was pleased to inform him that he had a place. It was objectively the most redundant piece of correspondence he had ever received. He put it in his bag anyway, because McGonagall was watching him with the look that meant she would be disappointed if he didn't. She took him to Diagon Alley the following week. He had never been to London, had never been anywhere outside the castle and its grounds and the Hogsmeade village they walked through on Saturday mornings, which was not outside so much as adjacent. Diagon Alley was something else entirely. Narrow and loud and crammed with colour, shops pressing in from both sides, cauldrons stacked in windows, owls overhead, 100 people with no apparent awareness of the Muggle Street, 20 feet away behind a pub that was a door. He noticed them looking at him almost immediately. Not everyone, but some, a woman by the apothecary who stopped mid-sentence, a pair of boys his age who nudged each other, an old wizard outside Flourish and Blots who went very still and then made a small motion with his hand, like a half-begun wave that thought better of itself. Harry kept his fringe down and kept walking, because McGonagall was already 3 steps ahead of him and moving at a pace that made clear she had not come to dawdle. "They're staring," he said when he caught up. "Yes," she said, "because of the scar, because of what the scar means. There is a difference." She did not slow down. "You knew people would know who you are. I knew it. I hadn't felt it before. And—" She glanced at him sidelong, a brief, sharp assessment, and said nothing. He understood that this was the most sympathy she was going to offer on a street in Diagon Alley, and that it was also honest, and that he would feel it fully later in a room by himself. He did not, he discovered, actually mind. They retrieved his money from Gringotts, bought his books and his robes and his cauldron and his supplies in the methodical way McGonagall did everything. And then she said they had one more stop. Ollivander's was narrow and dusty and smelled of something old that he could not quite name. The wand-maker himself appeared from the shadows, in the unhurried way of someone who has been waiting for a specific appointment and is not surprised it has arrived. He measured Harry in silence. He produced box after box. Each wand, when Harry held it and gave it a tentative wave, either did nothing at all or produced a response McGonagall described quietly as inadvisable. Mr. Ollivander was not concerned. He seemed, if anything, to find the process interesting in the particular way that people who have been doing something for a very long time find specific variations on a theme interesting. Then he held out a wand. "Holly," he said, "and phoenix feather, 11 inches, supple." And Harry took it, and the wand warmed. He felt it. Warmth up his arm and through his shoulder and into his chest. A recognition like the warmth of the castle, coming up through his feet, but smaller and more specific, like a lock and a key. He gave the wand a wave. The dust along the shelves swirled upward into a bright column and settled. Mr. Ollivander took the wand back very carefully. "Curious," he said. He was looking at Harry's forehead. "Very curious." He said that the phoenix, who provided the feather for that wand, had given only one other, that the other wand had given Harry his scar, that the wands were in the wand-maker's particular terminology, brothers. Harry walked out of Ollivander's into the late afternoon sun with his wand in a box under his arm and stood for a moment on the step. McGonagall stood beside him. She was looking at something in the middle distance that was not actually there. "You knew," he said. "Ollivander's methods are not predictable. But the scar is his scar, and that wand is that wand. Some things have a logic to them." He thought about this. Then he put the box carefully in his bag, and they walked back to the leaky cauldron and went home. He asked her about Sirius Black on a Tuesday evening in August, sitting on the window seat in her study with a book he was not reading. He had been building toward it for 2 years. He had seen the name in old prophets he found in the library's archive, had heard it in half-finished conversations that stopped when he came near. He knew Sirius Black was his godfather. He knew Sirius Black was in Azkaban. He did not know why, and the gap between those 2 facts had been sitting in him for long enough. "Tell me about Sirius Black," he said. McGonagall looked up from the parchment on her desk. "What do you want to know?" "Everything." She set down her quill. She told him what the official record held, that Sirius Black had been the secret keeper for James and Lily Potter, had betrayed the location to Voldemort, had been cornered by Aurors on a Muggle street the following day, and killed 12 Muggles in the confrontation, had killed Pettigrew as well, leaving nothing but a finger. She said, "This is what everyone believes." The phrase was flat and even and not quite neutral. Harry looked at her. "What do you believe?" She was quiet for a moment. She looked at the window, at the dark grounds outside. "I believe," she said carefully, "that the official record exists and that I have no evidence to contradict it. I also believe that Sirius Black loved your parents. I knew him as a student. I do not reconcile those two things easily." She picked up her quill again. "You should know that reconciling them is not required of you. You are allowed to hold both without resolving them." He thought about that for a long time after she went back to her parchment. Dumbledore asked to see McGonagall before the term began. He came to her study on the last Friday of August and sat across from her in the chair Harry used, and they had the conversation that was by now familiar in its structure. The question of Harry's readiness, the question of the protections. "Is he ready?" Dumbledore asked. "For Hogwarts as a student? He has been ready for 4 years. Ask him about any fourth-year defense text." "That was not what I meant." She knew what he meant. She held his gaze. "You're asking me if he is ready for what is in this castle this year." Dumbledore did not answer. "Then tell me what is in this castle this year." He told her about Quirinus Quirrell, who had accepted the defense against the dark arts position for the coming term. He said it carefully, with the particular careful pacing of a man who is giving you a piece of information and watching to see if you know what to do with it. "She knew what to do with it, Quirrell," she said. "He has been traveling. He returned, changed. I thought it best to keep him close." "Keep him close," she said. "And Harry and the stone." She did not ask which stone. She had been Dumbledore's deputy for 20 years. She waited. "There are things in motion," he said, "that were in motion before any of us made the choices we made in 1981. I want Harry to have this year. I want him to have his friends and his house and his first term as a student. What comes after he has time? How much time? Until June," Dumbledore said. McGonagall looked at the window. Outside, the grounds were going gold. Somewhere in the castle, she knew, Harry was probably at the library, reading something 3 years above his year level, entirely unaware that September had a shape to it this year that it had not had before. "All right," she said. "June." He had a reasonable argument, he thought. Students took the train to Hogwarts because students arrived at Hogwarts by train. He was already at Hogwarts. He had been at Hogwarts since November 1981. The train from King's Cross seemed, under these circumstances, to involve a great deal of unnecessary distance. To involve... McGonagall heard this argument with the expression she used when she had already made a decision and was permitting him, as a courtesy, to finish speaking. "You are a student this year," she said. "Students take the train. But the other students do not know you yet. The train is how they meet each other. You are going to meet them the same way they meet each other." She picked up his trunk and put it by the door. "I will walk you to Hogsmeade Station." He went. There was, he had learned over 11 years, a particular quality to McGonagall's certainty that meant the argument was over. He had gotten fairly good at identifying it. She walked him to the station on the morning of the 1st of September and watched him board the Hogwarts Express with the particular expression of someone who felt something strongly and had arranged her face to prevent any of it from being visible. He got on the train. He looked back through the window. She had already turned and was walking back up the path at the pace she used when she had somewhere to be. He found an empty compartment toward the middle of the train and sat down and looked out at the platform, which was still full of students and trunks and owls in cages, and thought, "I've never done this before." The boy who slid the door open 20 minutes out of Hogsmeade was red-haired and freckled and carrying half a pasty dot on his collar. "Is it all right if I sit here? Everywhere else is full." Harry looked at the compartment, which had 5 empty seats. He looked at the boy. "I'm Ron," the boy said, already sitting down. "Ron Weasley. Sorry about there were twins." He made a gesture that indicated significant off-screen chaos involving his brothers. Harry said his name. Ron's hand stopped halfway to his mouth, with the pasty. He looked at Harry's forehead. Just briefly, just the reflex of someone whose whole life had included stories about Harry Potter, the way other childhoods included stories about anyone famous, and then looked back at his face with what Harry recognized as the deliberate effort of someone deciding not to make a thing of it. "Do you want some?" Ron offered the pasty. "No, thank you. I've got chocolate frogs too, if you want." He produced them from somewhere in his robes. 6 of them, which is better than last year. He paused. "Where did you? I mean, everyone always wants to know, but I'm not supposed to ask directly," Mum said. "I grew up at Hogwarts," Harry said. Ron stared at him. "You grew up at Hogwarts. Professor McGonagall is my guardian. She took me when I was a baby." The expression on Ron's face cycled through several things before landing, on one Harry hadn't seen directed at him before. Not the reverence that came with the scar. Not the wariness. Something more immediate and personal, the expression of someone who has just received information that changes the shape of a thing they thought they understood. "So you know the castle," Ron said. "Like actually know it? Yes. The whole thing? Most of it." Ron leaned back and looked at the ceiling. "That's mad," he said, with the tone of someone who meant it as a compliment. "They talked for 2 hours. Harry asked about the Weasley family and got an account of 4 brothers above him, a sister not yet at school, parents who were order members, and a house called the Burrow that sounded like a building added to without architectural consultation. Ron asked about the castle and received the answer Harry had been constructing since August. He found he liked explaining it to Ron. Ron listened with the kind of attention that asks questions instead of just waiting for its turn to speak. The girl appeared in the doorway 40 minutes before they arrived, looking for a toad. "Someone named Neville's lost it," she said. She had bushy brown hair and an alert expression, and had apparently already checked several compartments. "You haven't seen a toad brownish about?" She held up her hands to indicate a size. They hadn't. She was about to leave when she noticed that Ron had his wand out. He had been attempting a spell from a card that came with the chocolate frogs, something that was supposed to turn the card's color. Nothing had happened. "That's not going to work like that," she said. She was not unkind about it, merely accurate. "The incantation is wrong. You're putting the emphasis on the wrong syllable. It's like this." She took out her own wand and performed instead of the one Ron was attempting, something rather more complicated that turned the entire chocolate frog wrapper, a bright silver. Ron stared at the wrapper. Harry watched her with a specific kind of interest that had nothing to do with the spell. He had grown up around people who did magic the way they breathed. He had seen professors who could transfigure a classroom in under 30 seconds, who corrected OWL papers with a wave of a hand. He had never watched someone his own age do magic before. She did it, like she had been doing it for years. She corrected Ron with the same matter-of-fact precision that McGonagall corrected students who had been in her class for a decade. "I'm Hermione Granger," she said, when the wrapper had faded back to foil. "Harry Potter," Harry said. "This is Ron Weasley." She looked at his forehead. Unlike Ron, She moved past the reflex more quickly. She had the look of someone who had read ahead and was now mostly interested in what came next. "I'll keep looking for the toad," she said. But she sat down first for a few minutes and asked Harry 3 questions about Hogwarts, with the focused precision of someone who wanted correct information from a primary source, and he answered all 3 of them. He saw the castle from the lake and understood for the first time what it looked like. He had seen it from the grounds, the covered bridge, the astronomy tower roof on clear nights. He had never seen it from the water, from a small boat in the dark, with the castle lit from within against the Scottish sky, its towers rising from the cliff above the lake. It was enormous. He had known it was enormous. He had walked its 7 floors, and its dungeons, and its towers, and its grounds, and still not reached every room. Knowing it from inside and seeing it from outside were, he found, entirely different things. From inside it was home, familiar, warm. From here it was something else, old and vast and alive, in a way that no building should be lit with 100 lights in 100 windows, its reflection moving on the dark water. He thought, "I grew up there." The thought was not quite pride, it was not quite wonder. It was the particular feeling of seeing something you have always known and understanding for the first time what it actually is. The sorting hat was placed on his head. It settled immediately into a quality of quiet that was different from silence, the quiet of something very old, paying very careful attention. Well, it said, in the interior voice that seemed to come from somewhere below thought. "This is interesting." He waited. "You know this castle the way very few people have known it. You were formed by it. You carry Lily Evans's mind and James Potter's instincts, and something else. Something in this scar of yours that I recognize and you do not know yet. You would do well. In Slytherin, the cunning is there. And that other thing, the thing in the scar, not Slytherin." He thought he had not intended it to be a demand, but it was absolutely one with all the certainty of someone who has grown up in a house. "I see," said the hat. It sounded very briefly like it was considering arguing. "Then, you know what you are. Most of them don't, not at 11. You've known since you could reason about it." He had known since he was 7 and sat in the library, reading everything he could find about Lily Potter, who had been Gryffindor. He had known since McGonagall told him about the night at Godric's Hollow, and he had understood that his mother had not hesitated. He had known the way you know the rooms of a house you grew up in. "Gryffindor," the hat announced. The Gryffindor table erupted. He took the hat off and walked toward the red and gold, and as he passed the staff table, he did not look at McGonagall. He knew she was there. He sat down among strangers who were already calling his name, and did not look. Later, much later, when the feast was done and the new first years were filing up to the tower, he glanced back. McGonagall was writing something. Her face gave absolutely nothing away. But the quill was gripped with what appeared to be unusual force, and the parchment, he noticed, had not yet received a single word. The other first years got lost. This was not a criticism. The castle was enormous and deliberately confusing in ways that Harry had long since mapped and accepted, and for someone who had arrived on September 1st, having never set foot inside it before, it was reasonable to find that staircases moved and corridors went different places on Thursdays. He watched his classmates blunder into the trick step and navigate by landmarks that rearranged themselves and end up in the wrong wing entirely, and he understood that this was a normal and expected part of the experience. He had just never had the experience himself. The caretaker caught 2 Gryffindor boys on the 4th floor on the 2nd day, coming from a direction that suggested they had taken the long way round from the library through a passage that was technically off-limits between 8 and 9 in the evening. He did not catch Harry ever, because Harry had never been in the wrong corridor. He had learned, at age 7, to be in the right one. Ron watched him navigate through the castle for 3 days and then said, "How do you just know where everything is?" "I grew up here," Harry said. Ron considered this. "But it moves." Ron gave him the look he was starting to recognize, the particular Weasley expression that meant deeply impressed mixed with mildly unsettled, and followed him down the correct staircase. McGonagall's Transfiguration class met on Tuesday and Thursday mornings. She entered at exactly the hour. She placed her things on the desk. She turned to the class with the expression she had worn at the front of a classroom for 20-odd years, which Harry had seen from every angle except this one, and she said, "Before we begin, I should tell you that transfiguration is some of the most complex and dangerous magic you will learn at Hogwarts. Anyone who messes about in my class will leave and not return." He had heard this speech before. He had heard it in fragments, through open doors in passing. Hearing it from the front row as a member of the class was a different thing. She looked at him once, briefly, and then looked at the class as a whole. "Potter," she said. 10 minutes in, when she wanted a definition of the theory of structural correspondence. Same tone as everyone else's last name. Same expectation. He knew the answer. He gave it. She moved on. Hermione gave him a look from 2 seats. Over she had known it too. He could see, and had been a fraction of a second behind him. And he gave her a small nod that meant, "Yes, I know you knew it." The other Gryffindors watched him, and McGonagall throughout the class with the focused confusion of people trying to solve a puzzle with pieces that didn't quite fit the usual picture. He was clearly not a stranger to her. She clearly showed him nothing that could be called preference. The relationship was too familiar to be teacher-student in the normal sense, and too formal to be anything obviously else. He understood that he could not explain it easily to people who had not lived it, and that they would probably work it out eventually. In potions, Snape arrived without apparent haste, and was somehow already at the front of the room before anyone registered the door had opened. He looked at the first years over the class with a quality of attention that had always made Harry slightly aware of the exits. Harry had known Snape his whole life. He had never once felt entirely comfortable in the same room as him, and had spent several years thinking about why, and had concluded it was something about the way Snape looked at him, the look that went to his face, and then to his eyes, and then away quickly, with the efficiency of someone filing something under a heading they did not want to examine. Snape asked, what would Harry get if he added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood? He knew this. He had read it. Draught of living death, he said. Snape asked, where would he look if he were told to find a bezoar? The stomach of a goat. He had read this too, 3 years ago. Second-year potions theory, restricted to students over 13, which he had obtained through methods he had seen no reason to disclose. Snape asked, what is the difference between monkshood and wolfsbane? He knew this one as well, had it on the tip of his tongue. They were the same plant, but he said so a half-second too quickly, and saw something cross Snape's face that he could not immediately name. It was not irritation either. Exactly, it was closer to the expression of a man who has been handed evidence of something he had already suspected, and is not certain how to feel about having been right. 2 out of 3 with some accuracy, Snape said, and the third was not incorrect. 5 points to Gryffindor. He moved his gaze to the rest of the class in a way that made clear this moment was over. Mr. Longbottom, I would suggest more care with your heating charm. Your cauldron appears to be dissolving. In the back of the class, Neville Longbottom looked down with the expression of someone discovering that his worst fear was in fact a reasonable one. Hermione Granger had read everything. This was the opening position, and Harry's opening position was that he had lived with everything, and they spent the first 2 weeks conducting a quiet, unannounced negotiation over which of these constituted superior preparation. She knew more theory. He had more context. She understood systems. He understood the specific. When Professor Flitwick demonstrated the wand movement for Wingardium Leviosa and explained the theory behind it, Hermione had the principle correct before anyone else. Harry had it working before anyone else, including Hermione, because he had seen the motion performed several hundred times from various angles over the course of 11 years, and his hands knew what his brain was still processing. She watched him with an expression of genuine interest. "How did you get it first try?" she asked in the corridor after. "The motion was familiar. I can't explain the theory." "I can," she said, and did. He found his understanding had a shape it hadn't had before, the why underneath the how. She found her theory had a practical texture she had been missing. They became friends the way things become necessary, gradually, and then completely. Quirrell had appeared in September, which meant he was new, which meant Harry had no prior relationship with him to measure against. Every other professor was already known. McGonagall, obviously. Professor Flitwick, who had smiled at him from across the staff room for 10 years, and was no taller now than he had always been. Professor Sprout, who had given him a small pot of devil's snare cuttings when he was 8, and explained that they were perfectly safe as long as you stayed calm. He knew them by their habits and their schedules and their specific qualities of movement and sound. Quirrell he did not know. He watched him teach in the way he watched new things, with the full attention he had developed young in a castle, full of things that had been there since before any living wizard was born, that rewarded attention. Quirrell was nervous in a way that did not quite match the situation. He flinched at sounds. He wore a purple turban and kept his back to the class when it did not seem necessary. There was something underneath the nervousness, not beneath it exactly, but inside it, a kind of stillness at the center that was nothing like nervousness at all. Harry put this to one side and continued watching. 3 weeks into term, Ron sat across from him in the common room after dinner and said with the casualness of someone who had been trying to decide how to say something for a while, "Is she your mum?" Harry looked up from his textbook. "Professor McGonagall," Ron clarified, apparently concluding that Harry might need clarification. He thought about the bassinet made from a drawer, and the cottage in Hogsmeade, and the kitchen table in the dark after Elphinstone died. He thought about 10 years of high standards and precise corrections, and the particular way she said his name across a classroom that meant she expected him to have the answer, and believed he would. "Not exactly," he said, "but something like that." Ron turned this over. "Yeah, all right," he said, with the straightforward acceptance of someone who had grown up in a large family and understood that the categories didn't always fit neatly. He went back to his charms homework, and Harry went back to his textbook, and the fire in the Gryffindor common room was warm, in a way that felt different from every room he had ever sat in before. Not because it was warmer, but because the person sitting across from him had been born in March 1980 and had never set foot in Hogwarts before the 1st of September. And that was, he was finding, entirely new. She was at her desk before the sun came up. There was always work. There was marking and correspondence and the particular administrative labor of keeping a castle of several hundred students running inside an institution that was also a school, and also this year, something else she was not yet ready to name. She had work to do, and she did it in the dark before dawn on the 31st of October, and she did not think about what day it was. She thought about what day it was. 10 years. 10 years since Lily had been 21 years old, and the last living world had ended and a new one had begun, small and heavy and breathing in her arms on a street in Surrey. 10 years since she had carried him through the gate, and the castle had confirmed itself around them both. She sat at her desk in the grey pre-dawn and did not cry because she never cried at her desk, and she thought about Lily Evans and the way she had argued about Charm's modification in the staff room on a Tuesday in August, and she thought about the particular green of Harry's eyes. At 7:30 she heard the soft approach of someone trying not to make noise in the corridor, which she recognized by a rhythm she knew as well as her own footsteps. A pause outside her door. Then the faint whisper of something slid under it, a piece of parchment. She picked it up. On it, in Harry's careful handwriting he had been writing since he was 5, she had taught him herself, were 2 numbers and a word, the 31st of October 1981. Nothing else. She sat at her desk with the parchment in her hands for a moment, and then she smoothed it flat and set it beside her tea and went back to her marking. The Halloween feast was enormous and loud and orange in the way the house elves understood Halloween to mean. And Harry sat at the Gryffindor table with Ron on one side and an empty space on the other, where Hermione would have been if she had not, 3 hours earlier, left the girls' bathroom on the 4th floor looking like she had been crying because she had been crying, because Ron had said something in Charms that Harry privately thought had been unkind and publicly thought was not his to comment on. He made a note to himself. Find her. He would find her after the feast. Quirrell came in while the food was still appearing. He came at a run, or whatever passed, for running for a man who moved at Quirrell's characteristic pace, and stood in the doorway of the great hall, with his purple turban askew, and his face doing something that Harry could not quite read from where he was sitting, and said, "Troll, in the dungeons. Thought you ought to know." He then folded to the floor in what appeared to be a faint. The hall erupted, Dumbledore's voice cut through it, prefects moving, students being directed back toward dormitories. Ron appeared at Harry's elbow. "Hermione," he said, because Ron, whatever his faults, was not slow. "She's on the 4th floor," Harry said. "Bathroom past the tapestry of Barnabas the Barmy." He had known every bathroom in this castle since he was 4 years old. Dumbledore had not said which corridor the troll was in. Quirrell had said the dungeons, which was the 1st floor and the basement, not the 4th floor. Harry moved fast and certain through the castle's logic, taking the shortcut through the concealed passage behind the portrait on the 2nd floor that cut 4 minutes off the walk. Ron kept up, which Harry made a note of approvingly. They heard the troll before they reached the bathroom. What followed was loud and close and involved a great deal of plumbing, Ron hitting things with the wrong end of his wand until he hit something correctly, and Harry doing something with a Wingardium Leviosa at the Trolls Club. Hermione Granger pressed herself against the far wall and described the situation in a rapid whisper that was remarkably precise under the circumstances. The troll went down. Harry and Ron looked at each other. Hermione looked at both of them. "You came to find me," she said. "Ron knew you hadn't heard," Harry said. "He also said that thing in Charms," Ron said, and then appeared to reconsider the timing, which I'm sorry about that. Hermione appeared to decide that the troll had used up her capacity for strong emotion for the evening. "We should probably go," she said. They did not get far before McGonagall arrived, with Professor Snape and Professor Quirrell behind her. She looked at the troll. She looked at the 3 first years. She looked at the troll again. She drew a breath that Harry recognized. "That is a mountain troll," she said, in the voice she used when she was controlling something significant. Yes, Professor, Harry said. Which is unconscious? Mostly Harry and Ron, Hermione said. I mostly described things. McGonagall looked at Professor Quirrell, who looked at the floor. She looked at Snape, whose expression was impossible to read. Then she turned back to the students and awarded points, 5 to each of them for presence of mind, 10 to Hermione for not panicking, and the same 10 to Harry and Ron for acting quickly and not getting each other killed in the process. Miss Granger, Mr. Weasley, she said, you may go. Mr. Potter, remain a moment, please. She waited until the others were gone, and the sound of their footsteps had receded up the corridor, and Quirrell and Snape had both departed in opposite directions, with the distinct bearing of people who did not wish to be present for whatever was about to occur. She said, knowing where every bathroom in this castle is located is not a license to ignore direct instructions about student safety during a crisis. He said, I know, you know, yes, and yet she'd have been alone in there. McGonagall looked at him for a long moment. Then she opened her record book to the Gryffindor page, wrote something very small and very legible at the bottom of the column, and closed it. 5 more points, she said. For the decision, not the result. Those are different things, and I want you to understand that. He did. He had grown up in this castle learning the difference between a good decision and a fortunate outcome, and knowing that the former was in your control, and the latter was not, and that the only one you could be proud of was the first. Good night, Professor, he said. Good night, she said. She did not say anything else, and he did not expect her to. He found Hermione the next morning at the library table. She had already established as hers. How did you know where I was? She asked. She had clearly been thinking about this since the night before. The bathroom on the 4th floor. There are 6 bathrooms available to female students in this castle. How did you know it was that one? I know every bathroom in the castle, he said. I've known this castle since before I could walk. She looked at him with the expression she used when a piece of information had arrived that was going to require significant rearrangement of existing knowledge. How many bathrooms? She asked. 14, he said. Not counting the prefects and the staff ones. She had approximately 12 follow-up questions. He answered all of them. By the end of the morning she had a list, which she titled Castle Geography, completee in her neat handwriting, and she looked at it with the satisfaction of someone who has finally obtained a primary source. He had watched Quirrell during the feast and after. He had watched the expression on Quirrell's face when the hall erupted in panic. Everyone else in the castle had looked afraid or startled or like they were working to manage their fear. Quirrell had looked at the chaos with an expression that was underneath the wide eyes and the trembling hands, something Harry could not name. Not afraid. Not anything like afraid. He put this away with the other thing he had been putting away since September, and thought, there is something wrong with that man. He did not yet know what to do with this. Christmas at Hogwarts had always meant the castle in a different register. Quieter, the corridors freed from the usual traffic, the great hall rearranged for the smaller number who stayed. Harry had spent 10 Christmases here before this one. He had learned to measure the holiday by the particular quality of the silence. The way the torchlight seemed to travel further without several hundred students in the way. The fact that you could cross the entrance hall without navigating anyone. He had stayed, of course. He had always stayed. But this year Ron Weasley had appeared at the train with his trunk packed for Hogwarts, and said, "My family's going to see my brother Charlie in Romania. I said I'd rather stay." The way Ron said it, with the efficient matter-of-factness of someone reporting a logistical decision and not an act of friendship, was something Harry filed away and did not comment on, because Ron was the kind of friend who preferred not to have things commented on. The castle at Christmas was good. Harry had always known this. He was beginning to understand that knowing it as a resident and knowing it as a student who had come home for the holiday were not the same experience. The package arrived on Christmas morning in a pile of parcels on his bed, wrapped badly, the way things were wrapped when someone was in a hurry or not accustomed to wrapping. Inside was a cloak. He knew about it. McGonagall had told him about James's possessions when she told him about his parents, had told him factually with the precision she brought to everything, that his father had owned an invisibility cloak, one of 3 objects called the Deathly Hallows, and that it was currently in Dumbledore's care. She had said this the way she said things she thought he needed to know, without elaboration. He had thought about the cloak, sometimes since then, the way you think about a thing that exists and is not yet yours. There was a note, "This belonged to your father, nothing else." No name. He did not need a name to know. He held the cloak in his hands for a long time. Knowing about it was one thing. The silk of it sliding between his fingers, silvery and light as nothing, was not knowledge. It was weight, or the absence of weight. It was his father's hands on this same fabric, 10 years ago, before everything. He sat on the bed in his dormitory while Ron slept across the room, and he held it, and he did not move. For quite a while he wore it for the first time that night. He knew this castle the way he knew his own name. He knew its passages and its shortcuts and the particular rhythm of patrol that the caretaker walked on winter nights. The cloak made him invisible. His own knowledge made him invisible, had already made him invisible for years in ways he had not fully articulated. Together they made the night castle absolutely his. He walked. He visited rooms he had visited before, and ones he had not. A music room on the 6th floor that smelled of old rosin, a classroom full of covered furniture on the 2nd, whose lock he had never been able to charm open. On the 2nd night, he found that the cloak made the castle's nighttime quality different. Not more frightening, but more private, like moving through a place that was breathing without knowing you were there. On the 3rd night, in a disused classroom on the 4th floor, he found the mirror. It was as tall as the ceiling, with an ornate gold frame that rested on 2 clawed feet, and it was not a mirror he had ever seen in this castle before, which meant it had been moved here recently, because he had been in every room on this floor, and it had not been here in September. He stood in front of it and looked at the inscription carved into the top, Irised stra, eru, oitiub, kafru, oit, on wossi. He read it backwards. He was 11 and had been reading things carefully for 8 years, and reversed script was not a puzzle. It was a sentence. I show not your face, but your heart's desire. He looked at what the mirror showed. He saw himself. He was standing in the mirror as he stood in life, in his father's cloak with his father's hair and his mother's eyes, and he looked at his own face for a moment before he registered that there were other people in the glass. A woman stood just behind him, dark red hair, long, and eyes that were his eyes, exactly the same green, the same shape, the same quality of looking carefully at things. She was smiling at him. She looked the way photographs looked, when you knew what you were seeing, recognizable from description, unfamiliar from life, and real in a way that photographs were not quite. Behind her, a man with unruly black hair and hazel eyes behind glasses, with Harry's same slight build and Harry's same unmanageable hairline, had one hand on Harry's reflection's shoulder. He was not smiling. He was looking at Harry with an expression of such specific attention, such focused recognition, that Harry's chest did something it had not done in front of any mirror before. They were his parents. They looked at him as though they had always known him. He stood in front of the mirror of Erased in the disused fourth-floor classroom and did not move. He was not sure how long he stood there. The castle was very quiet. He did not look away. On the fourth night, McGonagall was there. She was standing to one side of the doorway when he came in, not hiding, not waiting in ambush, simply present in the way she was present in places when she had decided to be in them. She looked at him, and he looked at her, and neither of them said anything for a moment. "You've known where I was," he said, "since the first night." She crossed the room and stood beside him, looking at the mirror. "I know this castle as well as you do, possibly better. I have 46 years on you." He looked at the mirror. He saw the same thing he had seen each night. His mother's green eyes, his father's hand on his shoulder. He did not look at McGonagall's reflection. He understood that what she saw was not something she would want him to see. She stood there for a long time. Then she said, "Lily Evans was the most gifted student I ever taught." He waited. She arrived in September 1971 with the quality of attention that makes you understand, within the first week of teaching someone, that you will spend 7 years looking forward to their work. She was precise, and she was imaginative, both at once, which is rare. Transfiguration and charms both at the highest level. She made other students better by being in the room. The mirror showed his mother's hair. He had only ever seen it in photographs. The photographs did not move. The mirror did, slightly, in the way that the mirror's version of a room was not quite static. "The last time I spoke with her," McGonagall said, "she was in the staff room discussing a theoretical modification to a standard charms framework that she had been working on. I was trying to get her to leave and go to dinner because it was 8:30, and she had been in that room since 5. She had her wand out and her notes, and she was making a point, and I was not listening as carefully as I could have been." She paused. "I have thought about that conversation many times." She stopped. He understood that what she had said was everything she intended to say on the subject, and that it had cost her something specific. He looked at the mirror for another moment. His mother was still smiling. His father's hand was still on the reflected shoulder. He thought, "I know what she sees." He thought, "I am not going to ask her, 'Did you mean to take me?'" he asked instead. That night on Privet Drive, she did not look away from the mirror. The silence was the length of a decision already made. "Yes," she said. He nodded. He had thought so, but he had wanted to hear it said plainly. They stood in front of the mirror together for a while longer. The castle kept its silence around them. When they finally left his cloak over his arm, her hand light and brief on his shoulder, once before she withdrew it, neither of them said anything more, and neither of them needed to. The flying lesson happened on a Tuesday in November, and changed several things at once. Draco Malfoy had taken Neville Longbottom's Remembrall, taken it in the particular way of someone who had decided the lesson's rules did not apply to him, and thrown it from his broom in a high arc toward the far end of the pitch. It was an act of pure, pointless cruelty, the kind Harry had read about but not encountered. Personally, growing up in a castle where the adults outnumbered the children 30-1, he had watched it happen and felt something sharpen in him. He went after it on instinct. He had been on a broom exactly once before this lesson, which placed him firmly among the least experienced students present. What he noticed was the arc of the Remembrall and the angle of the wind and the distance to the ground, and then he noticed that he was 10 feet off the ground, and then 3 feet, and then his hand had the Remembrall, and he pulled up sharply enough that the toe of his shoe left a line in the grass. Madam Hooch's class had gone very quiet. At the edge of the pitch, McGonagall was standing. He had not known she was watching. He did not in the moment register the expression on her face. Precise, controlled, with the particular quality of someone who has just seen something they already suspected and is now dealing with the confirmation. "Come with me, please." He came. She took him to the captain of the Gryffindor Quidditch team, a fifth-year boy named Oliver Wood, who received the news with the intensity of a person who has been waiting for a piece of information and has just received it. And that was that. The Nimbus 2000 arrived the next morning. He had not expected the broomstick to be significant. McGonagall had been giving him practical things his whole life. He had not expected the Quidditch team. The broom was an object, being allowed onto the pitch with people 3 years older than him who trained 4 times a week felt like something else. He found, on his first full practice, that he was good, not learning, good. Already good in the way of things that were formed before you named them. The first match was Gryffindor against Slytherin, with Madam Hooch as referee, on a morning in early November when the Scottish sky was the colour of old iron and the wind came off the lake in gusts. He spent the first 20 minutes learning the pitch, because learning the pitch was the same as learning any other room, its angles, its currents, the way the light fell in the east corner, where the stands threw a shadow. Gryffindor was up 50-30 when his Nimbus 2000 began to buck. It was not wind. He knew wind had flown in worse during training. This was something deliberate, a series of jolts that pulled the broom sideways when he corrected, that tried to unseat him in the moment between action and balance. He gripped hard and brought it level and held on while he looked for the snitch, because the thing to do was end the match. Below in the stands he caught a glimpse of Snape. He was in the faculty section, with his eyes fixed on Harry and his lips moving quickly, slightly, in the way of someone concentrating on something that required concentration. Harry registered this in the same part of his mind that registered everything important, the part that kept notes and did not yet know what to do with them. Hermione, he found out later, had seen Snape too and drawn the obvious conclusion and set his robes on fire, which had interrupted whatever he was doing and ended the jinx within seconds. Harry, at that moment, had spotted the snitch 20 feet below him and had gone after it in a dive that resolved itself 6 feet from the ground, with the snitch in his mouth because his hand wasn't fast enough. Gryffindor won 170-60. He coughed the snitch into his palm. McGonagall said nothing to him that evening except that he would need to clean the broom before the next training session. Ron said about 40 things in rapid succession that collectively meant that was extraordinary. Harry thought about Snape's face during the jinx and kept it where he kept things he hadn't yet understood. In February, Snape volunteered to referee Gryffindor versus Hufflepuff. The reason for this was not stated. It was accepted. McGonagall, Harry noticed, watched Snape take the pitch with an expression that he had learned over 11 years meant she was processing something she had not yet decided how to address. Harry caught the snitch in under 5 minutes. Not because he was trying to end the match quickly, but because it was there and the light caught it, and his hand was already moving before his brain finished the sentence. Snape awarded the goal and left the pitch. Harry watched him go. He had known about the third-floor corridor since September, because the castle had not had a locked corridor before September, and locked doors were worth noting. He had known about the 3-headed dog since October, because Hagrid, who Harry had known for 11 years and who had a relationship with secrets that operated on the logic of someone who found them physically painful to hold, had mentioned, in the context of something that was supposed to be a different conversation entirely, that the dog was his, that he'd lent it to Dumbledore, and that what it was guarding was a private matter between the headmaster and a man named Nicholas Flamel. Harry knew who Nicholas Flamel was. He had read about him at 8 years old in a library book available to any student over 5th year, which he had obtained from the library on the strength of McGonagall's standing permission and read in an afternoon. He knew what the Philosopher's Stone was. He knew what it did and who had made it. He had not told McGonagall about the corridor, the dog, or the stone. This was a decision he was aware of making. She was his guardian and his head of house, and the person who had managed everything in his life for 11 years. And he knew that if he told her what he knew, she would handle it, efficiently, decisively, and without him. He would be sent back to Gryffindor Tower, and she would go to Dumbledore, and the thing would be managed, and he would not be part of it. He thought about this, and filed it, and kept the decision. In March, Hermione found a reference to Nicholas Flamel in a large library book on the history of alchemy. She brought it to the table where Harry and Ron were playing chess. Ron was winning as he always did, and put it down with the focused satisfaction of someone who has been looking for a thing for a long time and has found it.
Nicholas Flam,
she said. He's the only known maker of the Philosopher's Stone. It produces the elixir of life. The person who drinks it becomes immortal. The stone is what's down there. She looked at both of them. That's what Fluffy is guarding, Ron said. Blimey. Harry looked at the page she had opened. Nicholas Flamel, 665 years old at the time of publication. He had read this book, or one like it, 4 years ago. Someone is trying to steal it, he said. Quirrell, Hermione said immediately. She had been watching Quirrell since Halloween, with the same quiet, focused attention she gave to everything, and had arrived at a conclusion Harry had arrived at in September. It has to be Quirrell. Harry thought about Snape in the stands. Snape's lips moving, the Jinx on his broom stopping when Hermione interrupted whatever Snape was doing. He thought, it is more complicated than that, he thought. I don't have enough information yet. He thought, it is going to need to be enough information soon. Outside the library windows, the grounds were going green. Somewhere in the castle, behind a locked door, a 3-headed dog listened to music and slept. It did not tell McGonagall. This was a decision, not an oversight, and he was conscious of making it. She was in the castle. She was always in the castle on evenings in June when exams were done and the administrative labor of the year's end was at full force. He could have knocked on her study door. He could have sent a message in 15 minutes. He had done both of those things over 11 years, for reasons considerably less urgent than this. He thought, if I tell her, she handles it and sends me to the dormitory. She was his guardian. She was the deputy headmistress of this school. She would go to Dumbledore's office and pull on the administrative structure of the institution, and the thing would be managed by people who were not 11 years old, and Quirrell would get away, or be caught, or something would go wrong on the other side of the trapdoor, in a way that required someone who knew exactly what was down there. The only person who knew exactly what was down there was him. He had been talking to Hagrid for 11 years. He had known about the dog since October. He had known what the dog needed since Hagrid mentioned it in a conversation that was supposed to be about something else. He had known about Nicholas Flamel since he was 8 and had read his way systematically through the Hogwarts library. He had spent 10 years watching Snape's mind work at close range. He had been in this castle since before he could walk, and the castle had been in him since before he could reason about it. He thought all of this, standing in the corridor with Ron and Hermione at 11:30, and he did not say any of it aloud. He said, "We're going now. I brought a flute. The 3rd floor corridor was unlocked." Quirrell had passed through already. The door to the stairwell beyond stood slightly open, and below it, in the chamber with the trap door, a small enchanted harp played itself in a corner, delicate, mechanical, perfectly pitched to the frequency that Hagrid had once described, with characteristic Hagrid imprecision, as what Fluffy likes. The three-headed dog was asleep across the trapdoor, with all three heads resting on each other, snoring in overlapping rhythms that went in and out of phase. Hagrid had told him about the music when Harry was 9. He had told him in the context of something else, in the way Hagrid always revealed things, sideways, unintentionally, while busy with a different thought. Hagrid could not hold secrets that pressed against the inside of his ribs for very long. Harry had filed the information then, and kept it, the way he kept everything. In the part of him that waited for the moment a piece of information became necessary. He had brought a flute made from wood that Hagrid had carved him for his 7th birthday. He played it now, not well but well enough, and Fluffy's snoring deepened and its paw lifted off the trapdoor's edge and the way was open. They went through. The first thing was the dark. Then the smell of earth and green, and then Hermione said, "Light," and her wand was up, and they could see the devil's snare wrapping itself around their legs with the attentiveness of something very old that had been waiting. Harry had been to Hagrid's hut in all weather and all seasons, and had met plants that moved, and some that bit, and a few that had opinions about being moved. He did not panic. He kept still, which was the first requirement, and watched Hermione assess the situation. Ron panicked, honestly and briefly, and with the forthright efficiency he brought to most things. He thrashed. The snare pulled tighter. "Relax," Hermione said, with the particular economy of someone who has already identified the correct action. "Stop moving. It hates light and fire." She produced a bluebell flame, and the snare recoiled in a wave, releasing them, and they dropped onto solid ground, and they went on. The flying key chamber was lit with moving light, hundreds of winged keys filling the air, silver and bronze and iron. Harry was on the broom before the others had finished looking up. He had spent 7 months learning the specific quality of a moving snitch, the way it moved differently from everything else, faster and less predictable, with a logic that was almost in tension. The right key was not a snitch, but it had a wing bent at the wrong angle from a previous catching, and he picked that out on the second pass and had it on the third. The door opened. They went on. The chessboard was McGonagall's. He knew before he had time to think about why. He knew it the way he knew her handwriting across 30 pieces of marked work and the way she walked down the east corridor before breakfast, the particular quality of orderly thinking she imposed on problems. The chess pieces were human-sized black and white marble, and they stood at attention with the stillness of things that had been set up by someone who had considered every possible approach and prepared an answer for each. Ron looked at the board for less than 20 seconds. "I can win this," he said, "but I have to play, and I'm going to have to sacrifice myself." He said it the way Ron said things that were difficult and true, directly, without softening, as though the difficulty was simply a fact to be stated before you moved past it. He had been playing chess since he was 4. He saw boards in a way that Harry, who was good at most things, had never been able to quite follow. He saw the board the way Harry saw the castle, as a landscape that had its own internal logic and its own right answers. "Ron," Hermione said, "it's the only move that gets Harry through. I've run it 3 times. He picked up the knight's reins and climbed up. "When I'm down, Harry goes for the king. The board will know." The game lasted 15 minutes. Harry watched it in the specific kind of silence that belongs to watching someone do something difficult that you cannot help with. The White Queen moved in a rush of marble and weight, and Ron went down, and the board fell still. Harry crossed it without looking back at Ron's body, because if he looked back, he would stop. He heard Hermione say Ron was breathing. He went through the door. The troll chamber was already unconscious. He kept moving. The potions puzzle was Snape's. He knew it without being told. 7 small bottles arranged in a line, and a rolled piece of parchment with a riddle poem that gave their properties through logical constraints, negative and positive, size and danger and adjacency. The poem had the quality of a mind that found elegance in economy, that would not waste a word, that thought the act of asking someone to feel their way toward an answer was beneath serious consideration. Harry had watched this mind work across 10 years of corridors and dining tables and the occasional overheard exchange between Snape and another professor, when the subject required precision and sentiment had no business being present. He read the poem once, for the words. He read it again for the structure. He felt the framework of it assemble itself behind his eyes the way the castle's layout had assembled itself when he was small, not memorized but internalized, the difference between knowing a fact and knowing where you are. 2 minutes. He picked up the smallest bottle, nearest the right end, cold, not painful, just cold, going down. The black flame at the far door died. The door opened. He looked back at Hermione. Her hand was pressed to her mouth. She had been doing the same calculation he had done, faster, and had reached the same answer, and she did not like it any more than he did. "Go back," he said. "Get Ron to the hospital wing. Harry. And if something goes wrong on my side of this door, McGonagall," she said. It was not a question. Yes. She looked at him with the full attention she gave to things she had decided to remember. "That you've seen it before. In December, I know what it shows, and I know why that matters." He had stood in front of the mirror of Erased and seen his parents and understood the inscription, and understood what Dumbledore would later tell him, that the mirror showed desire, and that the desire it showed was not always what you thought it was. He had thought about it since. He had thought about what he would see if he looked into it, knowing someone was trying to use it. He believed he knew. "I have an advantage," he said. She held his gaze for another moment, and then she turned and crossed the chessboard with her wand lit, and did not look back either. He heard her footsteps until he didn't. He stood in the black flame light alone, with the cold of the potion still in his throat and the stone in his pocket, and 11 years of this castle in every part of him. He thought, "This is my home." He thought, "Whatever I find on the other side of this door, I find it as someone who was loved well and knows it." He went through. The mirror was there. He saw it the moment he came through the door, the ornate gold frame and the 2 clawed feet standing at the far end of the chamber in the torchlight, as tall as the ceiling, and entirely familiar. He had stood in front of it on 3 December nights and understood it, and the understanding was still in him, clear and cold and useful. Quirrell was already here. He turned from the mirror with the particular smooth unhurriedness of someone who had not expected company and was deciding what to do about it, the turban. The careful nervousness that Harry had spent 8 months watching and knowing was not the whole picture. "Potter," Quirrell said. His stutter was gone. That was the answer to one question Harry had filed and kept. "Professor," Harry said. Quirrell looked at him with the specific attention of someone recalculating. He had expected, perhaps, the child who had grown up, sheltered in the castle's walls, protected and small and unready. He found instead a child who was standing in a chamber beneath Hogwarts at midnight and looking at the mirror of Erased with the expression of someone who had been here before. "You know what it is," Quirrell said. "Yes," Harry said. Then you know I need it." He gestured. "Look into the mirror, Potter. Tell me what you see." Harry crossed the room and looked. He saw himself in the glass. His own face, his father's hair, his mother's eyes. And then as he watched, the reflection's hand went to its pocket and drew out a small red stone that caught the light, and he felt something appear against his actual palm, solid and warm, the weight of a thing that had just moved from one reality to another. He understood the mechanism. He had lived alongside magical logic for 11 years, had absorbed it through the library and the portraits, and 10 years of proximity to the most complex enchantments in Britain, and the logic of this was not complicated once you held it correctly. The mirror gave you what you desired most. What he desired most was to find the stone before Voldemort could use it, not to use it himself, to find it and keep it safe. The mirror had heard this and responded the only way it could, by putting the stone into the hand that wanted it for no other purpose. The stone was in his pocket. He looked at his reflection for a moment longer. Behind the reflection's shoulder, faint as watercolor, a woman with dark red hair smiled at him from the glass. "I see myself," Harry said, "winning the house cup." Quirrell's face went sharp. He crossed to the mirror and stared into it and saw, presumably himself. He did not look satisfied. "You're lying," he said. "Everyone lies about what the mirror shows them," Harry said. "That's also how it works." The torches moved. Then Quirrell said, with the precise diction of someone who has stopped maintaining a pretense, "He wants to speak to you." He reached for the turban. Harry's hand went to his pocket, to the stone, solid and real. And he held still the face. On the back of Quirrell's head was barely a face. Chalk, white, flat, with slits where a nose should have been, and eyes that were a red that had nothing human in it. It looked at Harry with a quality of attention that went through him rather than at him, as though the Harry-shaped obstacle in its way was a problem it had already begun solving. Harry Potter, it said. He had known this name would come for him. Eventually, he had been told this since he was 9. He held the stone in his pocket and waited. "Look at you," the voice said. "Everything they told you that you were, a child in a castle, a ward, a professor's charity." It paused. "Do you know what you could have been if she had not taken you?" "Yes," Harry said. "A child on a doorstep." "Power," the voice said, as though he had not spoken. "Your bloodline. Your own McGonagall kept you small because a small child is manageable and a great wizard is not. She chose the castle because the castle is what she loves, not you. You were the means to stay there." Harry thought about a drawer, remade into a bassinet. 4 attempts until the proportions were right. He thought about Elphinstone reading a story a 3rd time, and Hagrid's enormous hand with a 7-year-old's grip around one finger, and Lupin's voice saying, "James," and a note slipped under a door on the 31st of October that was only 2 numbers and a year. He thought about the mirror, and December, and McGonagall standing beside him, looking at something she would not describe, and the way she had said yes when he asked if she had meant to take him. "No," he said. "You could have the stone," Voldemort said. "You could have everything, a new world, immortality, the power to reshape." "I have the stone," Harry said, a silence that was not quite silence. "Give it to me." "No." Quirrell moved. His hands came for Harry's neck with the speed of someone who had used them this way before, and Harry reached for his own hands to break the grip, and Quirrell screamed. The blisters came instantly from the point of contact. Quirrell pulled back, the body he had occupied betraying him, and reached again, and Harry grabbed his wrist, and the burning spread further, and Quirrell's scream was not human, The wraith left, when the body could not sustain it. Lily had stood between him and this. The magic of it was still in his skin, and whatever touched him with Voldemort's purpose found what she had left there and could not go further. Quirrell fell. Oh! The wraith passed through Harry like cold water and was gone. He was on the floor. The stone was in his pocket. The torches burned, and the chamber was quiet. Before the dark came down, he thought, someone needs to get McGonagall. He woke in the hospital wing, with sunlight on the ceiling and Dumbledore in the chair beside the bed. He looked at Harry over his half-moon spectacles, with an expression that contained in its careful layers relief and something very like guilt. "The stone," Harry said, "destroyed," Dumbledore said.
Nicholas Flamel and his wife have enough elixir to settle their affairs.
Quirrell dead. A pause. Your mother's sacrifice is still in your skin, Harry. It has been there since she placed it in 1981. Anything that carried Voldemort's purpose, anything that touched you with his intent, was burned by it. He folded his hands. I had arranged, 10 years ago, for that protection to live in your aunt's house, in the blood you shared with her. A longer pause. It appears that another protection claimed you first. Harry looked at the ceiling. He thought about the warmth moving up through the ground at Privet Drive, through McGonagall's feet, and into the arms that held him, the castle saying, "Yes." "It appears so," Harry said. Dumbledore was quiet. Then, "She is outside." "She has been there since they admitted you," he stood. "I am glad," he said, "that you are here." He left. McGonagall came through the door before it had finished closing. She stopped at the foot of the bed. She looked at him, at his hands, the scar on his forehead, the evidence of what the chamber had done, and she was perfectly still in the way she was still when she was containing something that had no appropriate outlet. Then she crossed to the chair and sat down. A long silence. "Did it work?" she said. "The stone is destroyed. Voldemort is gone. For now." She nodded. Once she looked at the window. Then she reached out and adjusted the blanket across his feet, which was already perfectly positioned and needed no adjustment. He looked at her hand on the blanket and understood every word she was not saying. "I know," he said. "I know. At the end of year feast, Gryffindor won the house cup, red and gold everywhere. Ron narrated the chess match to everyone who would listen, with modest improvements to the account each time. Hermione sat very straight and pretended not to be pleased. He looked toward the staff table. McGonagall was watching the hall the way she always had. She caught his eye. She gave him the smallest nod, not warmth, not pride, or both at once, contained and offered in the only register she had ever used. He had been reading her for 11 years. He turned back to his food. Outside the tall windows, the Scottish evening was going gold. The stone was gone, and Voldemort was diminished, and his mother's hands were still in his skin, and the castle was his home. It had always been his home. Lily had known that when she wrote the will, he was going home for